Greeting everyone. My name is Mohammadreza Mazarei, and I'm going to present you a narrative structure for open world cinematic VR called Story Without End. This framework is the result of a PhD project on Deleuze's theory about cinema, which consists of reconstitution of a cinematic terminology by looking at the Deleuze theory on the book C1 movement image and C2 time image, and design a creative practice based on the Deleuzian concept like rhizomatic narrative and machine assemblage. So let's start to see what is open world VR when I'm talking about the open world VR. An open world VR is a type of immersive experience in which audiences are provided with interaction tools, a level of agency that allow them to explore and interact with objects and various episodes of events dispersed spatially within a 3D environment. So these events are interconnected through narrative threads that first these threads establish a causality between these events. They should maintain the coherence of the story, and more importantly, they have to create a whole, a mechanism of time representation which apply to whole storyboard and create a story. First, the movement image regime that Deleuze discussed. Deleuze discussed that there's two main elements that create cinematic narrative: distance and duration. By distance means the distance of the objects and the camera inside this storyboard, and the duration of the events that flew inside this storyboard. These two elements apply through camera, which is the translation of a perceiver inside the board of the story, and the application of the montage, which provide the expression of the events to give them a duration. As a result, as Deleuze said, a sensory motor schema provided which make a sensible progression for the story. And this sensory motor give audiences a power of anticipation to predict what happened next, and a quality of interpretation of what experienced by now. So this is a cinematic illusion that created by a camera that look at the events inside the storyboard and create a consciousness, a cinematic consciousness, as Deleuze discussed. So the generic elements that used to design the storyboard for a movie is the spatial-temporal coordination of the perceiver and perceived objects. Deleuze also talk about another regime of the image, which mainly happened after World War II, and call it post-war cinema, which the main feature of this regime is a wandering perceiver, a wandering camera, which emancipated from the viewpoint, emancipated from the viewing the only dramatic event, and start to wandering about the storyboard. And this change caused that a breakdown in the sensory motor schema that create the relation between the events inside the storyboard. As a result, which are duplicated for immersive cinema, because in the immersive cinema we have audiences that can wander about inside the spatial and in a 3D environment. So I replicate this situation for immersive cinema. And result of this situation first is a direct time representation, as Drew said, that audiences feel the present time, feel immersed inside a real-time story experience. And this condition gives them a subjective present because their emotional contribution toward the narrative is not more empathy, it's a self-directed kind of emotion. They feel themselves as a part of the story world. And I examined this change through my PhD by a test. And I found out that this feeling of self-directed emotion give them a feeling of indetermination, a free will, because they are free to perceive whatever they want, to wonder and perceive, and this is the true freedom for the humankind. And that's how it's become exploration of the storyboard become an interactive act. So I reconstituted a terminology for the immersive cinema, in which the storyboard, as Deleuze said, contain of three main elements. The space covered, which is the 3D environment that the story happened. For the VR, it's a completely virtual environment, but for the mixed reality or augmented reality cinema, it can be, a specific physical space. The moving object, which belong to this space and indicate a change inside this space. This moving object exists to make this space covered alive, to make them a place that dramatic incident can happen. And the dramatic movement or dramatic incidents, which prescripted and designed by a storyteller. So designing this storyboard means to create a mechanism of announcement and secrets, as Deleuze said, a machine assemblage, but this machine assemblage should be a plane of immanence. It means that it shouldn't refer to any specific viewer. It exists, and all the events inside this space is, immanent. And for Deleuze, the narrative and cinematic narrative is an interaction between perceiver and perceived. So we can say that the narrative in immersive cinema is designated events placed in a spatial temporal coordination and interconnected to each other through the threads to represent a regime of before and after for each event. And this event should be explored by a designated avatar, a virtual body, with a specific degree of interactivity, with a specific tools of interaction, with an agency to explore these events. So the audiences and their ability is a part of the narrative. Designing agency for the audiences is part of designing cinematic narrative for immersive cinema. So now we can say that the open world cinema is a plane of immanence, a continuous flow of duration indicating a change in the environment in real time without referring to a reader anchor. The storyboard that imposes a depth of field by creating a perspective over movement in a space for each spatial temporal coordination of the observer, and it generates an out of field by providing events out of the spatial temporal coordination of the perceiver, and it established upon a presupposed whole, a script, to provide a prescripted emotional journey for the audiences, and this is exactly the cinema. And what distinguishes the cinema from the game in regard of the content is that the content for the cinema is pre-created versus the real-time story generation in the game. And regarding the environment, this environment for the cinema is explorable, but for the game it's explorable and reprogrammable. And the user of the open world cinema are only observer. They are only observe the events and interact with the object in order to observe new events. But the user of the game are player and interact to generate. And now the two main approach to design interactive stories, the plot-centric or character-centric. Now mainly for the cinema we talk about the plot-centric. But for the product like Lone Echo or No Man's Sky or the LA Noire, the case of VR, now the audiences interact with the object to uncover the story, and it's somehow character centric, but still can be considered as a cinema. So it is the challenging part of this definition, and I'd like to know more discussion about this. Now, what I designed as the story without end is a rhizomatic narrative. Now, which two main principles of the rhizome apply to this. The first principle, as you can see, is the principle of the connection, which means that each point of this rhizome can be connected to any other point in the rhizome. And the second principle is the principle of a signifying rupture, which means at whatever point the rhizome is ruptured or destroyed, it will always keep growing according to the different line or connections. And this rhizome that you see here, and I will discuss more details about it, it's an any space whatever, a Deleuzian term, which in definition is a situation that the perceiver can grasp all times at once, all the potential alternatives, and the freedom of actualization of a state of things. It's a condition that the audiences can interact and choose to perceive whatever is next. And by perception, they actually make a state of things, a definition, explanation about the causality of the narrative. So this proposed framework replicates this condition by interconnecting concurrent timeline. You can see 3 different timelines in a way that the Wanderer audience has simultaneous access to all timeline and spaces with a designated method of the movement between the different space-time blocks. I applied this narrative structure to a project called Deja Vu Project, which first exhibited in the Level Virtual 2022, and 3 different storylines. It's the movie with 3 different storylines, each happen in one location. You can see storyline 1, storyline 2, and storyline 3, and they interconnected through the character's journey. The characters move between these storylines and connect the storylines and make a dramatic relation between these 3 different stories and make them synchronized. So the characters are threads in this design. And the method that I use to synchronize them is that I start with the first character, the main character, which called Architect. He spent 3 minutes in one location, so it becomes period 1 in storyline 1. Then he goes to the storyline to location 2, the storyline 2, and spend 3 minutes over there. It becomes period 1 in the storyline 2, which is concurrent with the period 2 in the storyline 1. And then he traveled to the storyline 3 and spent 3 minutes over there, and it became the period 1 for this storyline. And the same repeated, and the storylines are in the repeat because the character, the architect, return again to the storyline 1, something somewhere here, and repeat this journey. Then I start to write the story for the second character who interact with the architect in storyline 2, and continue writing her journey, and then she interact with the third character in the storyline 3, and then it's the start point for writing the story of the third character. In this framework, I connect all the journey of the character and make all these 3 storyline concurrent. And finally, I create a regime of movement image, as Deleuze mentioned. So this design apply additional principle to this reason to make the story endless. And this is the principle of infinity, which says that the sequence of the character's journey between different locations add an additional layer to the sequence of event in each location. Thus, a circular order for the character's journey which make it infinite, resulting the story of each location to repeat endlessly. And in design of the space and the agency for this wanderer audience, I put all the location in the interior surface of a cube and make them visible all the time for the audiences, and design no teleportation technique, only real walking. My audience should really walk, spend the time, reach the doors, touch these doors that you can see in the scene, and transport to the other location. So if they touch the green door here, they teleport here. But they need to walk and spend time. And as a result, I create 2 type of out of field. And the creating out of field is the things that a designer have to do to pursue the audiences to discover, to travel across the storyboard and discover the story and unfold the narrative. The first type of out of field is depend on their spatial coordination, called the relative out of field. This relative out of field is a Deleuzian term, which reconstitute here. It means that the audience can observe a whole storyboard immediately. However, they can't hear characters' voice on other places. It's somehow an out of field of hearing. So they travel to the other places to discover the story on the other places. And about their temporal coordination, I created an absolute out of field, which this wanderer audience subjected to this regime of movement image. They have the same ability that the character has, and because they feel themselves as a part of the story, and they are this subjective presence inside the story. They have to walk and spend time and travel like character all across this storyboard. So this make some events out of their temporal coordination, because they can't grasp all the events at once. They don't have the eye of God, although they can see all the storyboard at once. So the subjective perceiver now create their own personal series of before and after. They create their own personal journey over the story unlimitedly. And it means that there is a consciousness of alternative, because there can be different kind of journey, and each journey, each kind of journey create a different interpretation, because they create a series of before and afters through their personal journey. Thank you for listening. You can contact me via my email or scan this QR code to go to the website about the project and read more about it. All the conferences and seminars that I have participated and talk about different aspects of this project are there, and you can find details about the production process, about the story, and I will upload my doctoral thesis as soon as it's completed. It's in the final stage, and you can find more discussion and more information about this project, the terminology that I use, my approach to the Deleuze on cinema, and my definition of the open world cinema over there with details. Thank you for listening.